Hello, and welcome back to Got Ahead. This is part of our series about forget-me-nots, which are those really useful tools in your learning toolkit. So what one are we looking at today? We're looking at Adda, which stands for Alternative Directions, Different Angles. This is one of the tools that you'll use in your role as pioneer. When you're going out looking for uncharted territory, different ways of doing things. So you want something that is going to put a different slant on things, a different perspective. You're going to not just do it the same way that it's been done before. There's an old business expression, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And we want the absolute opposite of that. We want you to do something different, to look at it from a completely different perspective so that you're coming up with something fresh and new and interesting. For instance, if we start with memory, well, how is memory going to help you with Adda? Well, think back. What was it like when you were a child, a very young child? How did the world or certain things within it look to you at that age? Everything was bigger than it seems to you now. You had a different life experience, so you would put a different slant on things that happened to you than you would now. Similarly, it could be, what if there's someone else that's the age that you were then rather than the age that you are now? How would that affect things? You could also, if it came to observation, be quite practical, change the angle of viewing. So something like get up high and look down. Similarly, look at the same thing but from a completely different angle. Now this, although we're starting to talk about observation here, a lot of this can be spread out and used metaphorically with other areas of your learning. So although we are saying look at the same thing from a different angle, that's not just observing, moving where you are and looking at a different thing, but actually in here, look at what you're doing from a different theoretical perspective. Look back down the path the way you came. Again, in observation, it is literally turn round and look at the way you've just been coming. But metaphorically, we're talking about, well, how did this seem to you when you didn't know very much? How does it seem to you now that you know a lot more? How might it seem to you if you know lots about a subject? So if you think about yourself on a learning path, look up and down the path to see if that can help you look at things from a different perspective. It could be as simple as lie down on the ground and look up. We talked about being high and looking down. You could equally be low and look up, metaphorically as well as realistically. Use a different door or use a window in your learning as well as physically. Get to things a different route. Change your light source. Things look very different if they're being viewed from a different way with different things being focused in on. So you get different shadows and different lights depending on your light source when it comes to observation. And the same is true metaphorically. You know, depending on whether you're using a torch, a spotlight, or whether you put the light on. What about if you look at something in reflection? How does that change your way of looking at it from if you were looking at it in person, or if you were looking at it in the negative, or if you were looking at it from a historical perspective? I mean, here we have the Gherkin, and we have, that's the new London, and right beside it we've got the old London. Two very different perspectives, very close together, but it would give you a very different answer to what you're doing, whether it's in physically observing something or in a theoretical way in your thinking. What about if you've got reflection but it's not a flat plane? What about if there's a curve on it? What does that do to reflection? It could be like an Escher painting, where things actually start going off in different directions, and they're never where you expect them to be. There are strange staircases that curl round and come back to things, and you can do that in your thinking. Instead of just doing the same route that everyone else does, let's try something that's just a slightly different slant on what everyone else is doing. Be new, be interesting, be different, and you do that by changing your perspective. What is something like if you're looking at it upside down? You could zoom in, like your microscope, or zoom out, like your telescope. There are all sorts of different ways that you can change perspective. If we talk about reading effectively, we can talk about using all sorts of different sources of information, using original sources wherever possible, obviously. So anything from, a birth certificate to non-fiction books, fiction books, tablets, computers, using your local library, using museums. They're all ways that you can get different sources of information. And if you're getting the information from different places, it will give your learning a much more robust feel instead of just being down one narrow pathway. Come at it from different ways and you'll find different information, different sorts, different levels, but more to the point, interesting information. And of course, if you're reading effectively, it's all about reading material from different standpoints or cultures. So we're working really in connection with Whose Views here, where you're looking at something which would be the same topic, but from a very different perspective. What would it be like if even the text were different? If you were talking about Japanese writing as opposed to what you're writing in the UK. Equally, it could be something like left wing versus right wing if you're talking about politics. What would different cultures say about different material or different historical perspectives? What would the Romans have thought about modern plumbing, for instance? Still on reading effectively, you could read material from different levels. Now, this is back to your axes to grind. We've looked at that before. Go and watch the axes to grind clips again if you're not sure. But where you're doing it here is to quite deliberately read material from different levels. So to see whether the different approach in the different books gives you an idea of different ways to do things. If we move on to thinking, imagine yourself experiencing things from very different positions. You could be Einstein taking a mental trip on a light beam. You could conduct your own thought experiments where you go to other places or eras or events in your own mind. You could combine it with Whose Views again, where this time you're considering a question but from someone else's point of view who isn't a natural in that topic. So we talked about the Romans considering modern plumbing. What about someone like Archimedes considering it? If it's a personal perspective rather than a cultural perspective. You could also think laterally. Is there another way that a particular thing could be done? Even something like a slide. There are lots of different ways that you could put that together. Now, when it comes to Adda, there are lots and lots and lots of forget-me-nots that it works with. It's one of the most useful forget-me-nots in terms of cross-pollination, working with other forget-me-nots. There's other pioneers. There's also ones that will help you be a coach, ones that will help you be a scientist, ones that will help you be a judge. But you can use the two together to change your perspective, and that can suggest which perspectives you want to change to. Equally, the cross-pollination can go the other way, where there are other forget-me-nots that are using Adda the farmer ones, for instance, where Adda could provide very useful fertilizer for the thinking that you have to do. If you're struggling to get ideas in Wonder, where you're looking for more inspiration, try looking at what you're doing from different perspectives to see if that will throw off some ideas, or use it in ACEs to put your ideas together in different ways, using those different perspectives to give you ways to create new solutions or new ways that something might work. We talked about cross-pollination, but there's actually a group of forget-me-nots which are almost the direct opposite of Adda, and that's worth bearing in mind. They take a very different viewpoint, back to Adda, from Adda. But why? We're saying, have more, enrich what you're doing. You want more ideas, more solutions, you want to add richness to everything. But actually, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you need to get things right down to the bare minimum. You maybe don't have time or resources to do a wider thing, so you have to go straight to the area that you think will work, and it's only if it doesn't work that you go to Adda and say, well, okay, my first plan didn't work, what other way could I do this? Or if you've got something like hamburger where you really don't have a lot of time, you need to get the essential. If you haven't got the bun and the patty, it ain't a hamburger. But if you have time, you can go back in and you can put on the cheese and the bacon and the mushrooms and the ketchup and the onion and whatever you like on your burger. But those are optional extras. You have to make sure that the essential is done before you add on the extras. So there's a few that work when things are time sensitive or resource limited. But once you've done that, you can always go back to Adda and start adding the bells and whistles or the extra bits that they could benefit from once you make sure that the minimum level is achieved. So there you go, a very quick sprint through Adda, but the whole point is to use it to come at things from alternative directions, different angles, change your slant, change your perspective. It will give you far more ideas, it will give you more solutions, it will give you added depth if you can physically or metaphorically change the way you look at things. Enjoy looking at them in that different way. It's fabulous.